Welcome everyone to today's formation session. We're doing a special video today with a special guest named Clare Morell, who's the author of an important book that I read last summer with my wife Stephanie and have been trying to implement to the best of our ability. It's called The Tech Exit, and it's a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. And I think we're all aware that smartphones are like ubiquitous in our society and have a very, very big influence on how we're living our lives, but maybe don't always know how much we like that, what aspects of that we like, what aspects of the impact we're happy with, content with, and maybe other aspects that we're concerned about. And so today we're going to dig into all of that and more with Clare. So as we get started, welcome, Clare. And can you just share a little bit of your story? I know you work for the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Maybe you could explain what that is and just how this became a passion project for you.
Yes, absolutely. Excited to be here. So, yes, I work as a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center here in Washington, D.C., and it is a conservative Judeo-Christian worldview think tank. And for those who aren't familiar, think tanks are nonprofit organizations that are set up to help our lawmakers inform them on kind of the best research in different topic areas, and then also help support good policy ideas and solutions. And so for the past 5 years, I have been working specifically on trying to help state and federal lawmakers pass better laws to protect our kids online, and to support parents in protecting their kids from the harms of smartphones and social media and online pornography. And that work also is what led me really to write this book, because I was kind of face to face with all the harms and the dangers and was often asked for my advice from parents, like, well, then what should we do? And I was convinced that a smartphone-free social media childhood was necessary, that the screen time limits and parental controls and kind of other methods held out to parents as a solution were not adequate. They were not actually effective, and they were extremely frustrating for parents. And instead, a total opt-out was needed. But I really didn't know the practical kind of answers for parents of how do you actually do that? What does it look like? How do you overcome, obstacles to doing that? And so that is what set me off on writing the book, is I was really desperate to find these answers for parents, to give them this advice. And so I interviewed then just dozens of families who have done this tech exit lifestyle, successfully raised their kids and teens, and interviewed them. And then the book is really a distillation of the kind of practices and principles that those families had in common that really did allow them to live a family life and help their children live free of smartphones and social media and all the accompanying harms and dangers of those technologies. So the book came out in June of last year. And the whole point of my book was to help parents, but also to change the culture. I really wanted to inspire cultural change. So I obviously work on the policy level still, trying to help pass better laws, but parents are on the front lines. And so really wanted to help parents and families and communities to live out this lifestyle. And I'm also a mom of 3 children. And so I am personally passionate about this as well as a parent.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just, I guess, follow up to that, I know as I've been thinking about this vis-a-vis my own children, it's held up a big mirror to my own use of technology for me.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
but was that your experience at all as you're learning about the effects on kids, just seeing like, oh my goodness, adults are not immune to the same temptations and the same effects?
Absolutely. So I think, for children, their brains are particularly vulnerable. They're going through these
Mm-hmm.
rapid periods of brain development in childhood and adolescence, but adults and our brains are not immune to these addictive
Mm-hmm.
effects. And so it was
Mm-hmm.
very self-reflective for me in writing the book, learning more about the research, and just the conviction that in order to really help my children live free of smartphones, I need to be a good model and example for
Mm-hmm.
them of what it looks like to have a good relationship with our technology and with specifically with a phone. And so I actually ended up giving up my smartphone about 2 years ago, kind of in the process of working on this book. And it really has helped me be a better mom and a more engaged parent, because I just don't feel like I'm having to constantly fight the addictive pull and the kind of pull towards distraction of the phone. So I talk about this a lot in my book, but there's just better alternative options now than there were even a few years ago. And
Hmm.
those are true for teens, but I think also for adults looking to live a life kind of freer of these distractions. And so I have something called the Wise phone, which is kind of
Yeah.
funny. It's a play on not smart but wise, and it just
Yeah.
has no internet browser, no email, no social media, no addictive apps, just things that are truly tools like a
Yeah.
GPS
Yeah.
and everything I really need. So anyway, all that to say, yes, I think I have been on a journey myself towards a healthier use as a parent and recognizing that that is part of the equation in terms of helping to raise our children well on these things is setting an example for them as an adult.
Yeah. Wonderful. That's awesome. Well, to get started, could you just run us through what any of the statistics that you think are most important for us just to be aware of?
Yes. And that is there's a lot that I could go over, but I will just say I think just in my research, some of the things that are most compelling to me is just seeing the drastic increases in mental health harms among our young people just in the last decade. And so we've seen emergency room admissions for self-harm among 10 to 14-year-old girls triple. Um, Last year, the CDC found that 1 in 3 high school girls seriously considered taking her own life. I mean, that's 1 in 3 of our young American women who are really starting to set off in the prime of their life, feeling so hopeless that they would consider taking their own life. And this is just unprecedented in history.
Hmm.
And Jonathan
Hmm.
Haidt and Jean Twenge and others have really documented this rise in these mental health issues of anxiety, depression, suicide, self harm, eating disorders kind of skyrocketing and spiking was all around the time that the smartphone and social media became kind of a ubiquitous part of childhood and teenage years. I think other kind of alarming statistics that I pay attention to is the amount of kind of exposure to dangerous content or bad actors on these platforms. So Meta has found that as many as 100,000 children received sexual content sent to them on their platforms a day.
Hmm.
A hundred
Hmm.
thousand minors a day, and the companies know this. So this is their internal
Hmm.
research documenting this, and so it's a massive problem. And when we realize then that the average age of first smartphone is around 10 or 11, and that 95% of teens in the US use social media, and 1 in 3 teens say that they are on it constantly. A
Hmm.
new study that just came out from the University of North Carolina found that about a third of the average teenager's school day is spent on their smartphone. So now there are more,
Hmm.
schools adopting smartphone bans. But if there isn't a ban, then the average teen is actually spending about a third of their time at school on their phone, mainly looking at social media or video apps. And so there's just really kind of startling effects on attention, focus, memory, ability to comprehend and think deeply, as well as these spikes in mental health. And then these really high rates of exposure to sexual content, violent content, kind of how quickly these apps send kids down really dangerous rabbit holes. So that's just kind of a broad strokes. And I will also just say more studies have also come out kind of longitudinally, and they're finding like the younger the age of first smartphone, the worse the mental health outcomes as a young adult. So, like
Hmm.
10 years later, people are struggling with worse mental health effects. And the largest increase they saw was actually in suicidal ideation,
Hmm.
was much more increased in young adults the younger the age they had gotten their first smartphone. So there is a cumulative impact as well
Hmm.
to children and teens being exposed so young to these technologies. And so as long as we can just protect that kind of critical period of development as long as possible from the influence of social media and smartphones, I think we'll see enormous benefits in our children, their development, and their health.
Yeah, beautiful. Um, you touched on this briefly, but there was an important article that came out a few years ago, kind of a whistleblower article that Meta, which for people that don't know is the parent company of Facebook and Instagram,
Instagram. Mm-hmm.
um, that their internal communication, somebody shared publicly that they know that the spike in teenage suicide, especially amongst teenage girls, that it's not correlation, it's causation. I mean, that's hard to prove, but they're well aware of that identical graph of that spike uh, perfectly coincides with the rise of social media use. So it's just uh, that was kind of a dark moment, I think, for us culturally to realize, oh, they're not unaware of this, and they just don't seem to care. But to transition for parents, like I think if we zoom out when smartphones became prevalent in 2007, we didn't know what the implications of this would be, right? And it's universally true that
Yep.
parents want what's best for their children. um, and now the data is there, and we can either confront that data and respond to it or not. And when parents have options for their children, they're almost always going to choose whatever option is best for them. So uh, we have habits, though. Culturally, we have cultural norms of I think the stat that I read recently was like 95% of American teenagers have at least access to a smartphone, if not their own.
Yep.
So it's pretty well established that that's normal.
Hmm.
What are some of the roadblocks that parents are going to run into if they decide to pursue a different path for their families?
Yeah, I think some of the most common roadblocks, and these are things I really do directly try to kind of take on in my book. I think the first is that the biggest concern is that their child will be socially isolated or struggle to have
Mm-hmm.
friendships because
Mm-hmm.
so much of social life for teens is mediated now through these social media apps and the smartphones. And so I think that is a real concern. I don't dismiss parents' concern about wanting to make sure their children have
Mm-hmm.
good friendships. But I would just say I don't think the answer is giving them a smartphone. I think the answer is that unfortunately it just takes more intentionality and work on our part as parents to then help them pursue those friendships in real life, taking them to
Mm-hmm.
their friends' houses, finding those friends that are more
Mm-hmm.
like minded in those families, and taking then time and effort to kind of help them develop really good real life friendships. And I think also recognizing, I often get said, well, my child's not going to know about these plans that all their friends are making because they're not in this group text or they're not in this Snapchat, chat. And I think what is true is that a real friend will find a way to reach you and to include you if you're not. And so I think some of these decisions can have initial costs to them and initial kind of pain points. But in the long run, our children will be better off. They will actually find their real friends faster because those are the kinds of people who will reach out to our kids. But I do just recognize that there is a social component. And I talk about this in my book that unfortunately, the harms of smartphones and social media are not just individual, they create these collective harms with these negative group social dynamics where even then kids who don't have smartphones or social media can still feel some of the negative impacts of feeling anxious or lonely or left out just by the nature of those social dynamics. So it really is critical to find other families, if you can, to do this with you. Even if your child just has one or two other friends who also don't have a smartphone, that's incredibly helpful. It's in kind of buffering those negative group dynamics. So that's a real challenge that I think parents will have to put effort into helping their children then navigate those kind of social dynamics and navigate those friendship kind of decisions. The second thing I think that is a challenge is that now there are certain things where apps are required, whether that's to
Mm-hmm.
participate in a sports team. I increasingly hear from parents, my teen's employer requires them to use XYZ app to clock in and clock out of their job. And so I think, again, this can take intentionality on the part of parents to try to then find workarounds to some of those app-based requirements that there might be for kids' activities or employment. I will say some of these alternative phones offer some of those tool-based apps that might be the ones that are required, since they're not, a social media app that's addictive. I found that to be true with my Wise phone, and I think it's true with some of these other phones, like the Pinwheel phone or the Bark or Gab phone, which are better options for teens for a first phone. But then other times, I think it just involves us as parents being willing to have conversations and just say, Like, this is not going to be the reason that we get our child a smartphone. We're not going to be pressured into this decision by these kind of outside forces. And so, can we figure out a workaround? Can we find another way for my child to participate in this activity or for them to log their employment hours? And I think for every parent that stands up to kind of that tyranny of the smartphone and tries to find a workaround, we actually make it easier on other parents
Hmm.
to do the same. So I think those are the main kind of challenges I see is navigating the social dynamics, navigating some of those app-based requirements. And a lot of parents are concerned, what about when my kid starts driving for safety reasons?
Hmm.
They need a GPS. Again, most of these alternative phones I just mentioned have great GPS. I have Google Maps on my phone, and it's not a smartphone. And then also, there's better options to opt for in terms of a first cell phone. It doesn't have to be a smartphone for them to have a tool to stay in touch with you, when they're driving or they're moving around more independently. So I encourage parents to delay the age of first cell phone as long as possible. And then when it does come to that point where they have more independence, then opting for one of the alternative phones that just doesn't have an internet browser or all these dangerous kind of addictive apps on it. I think those are all the main challenges. I also often get asked, well, how will my kid be prepared for this technological age if they don't have a smartphone and social media? And I try to kind of address this as well, where we can teach our kids how to use the internet and a computer as a tool, as it's meant to be in a kind of public place, like a family home computer. And they can actually learn computer science, they can learn coding skills and research skills, and they don't need a smartphone or social media to do that, because smartphone and social media just teach kids how to be distracted, how to be entertained, how to scroll their time away and switch between apps. It's not giving them real tech skills to be successful. So I think just countering some of those myths can be just helpful to keep in mind as a parent. Like, your child's not going to be missing out or set behind or be worse off. In fact, they'll be smarter, better critical thinkers, better able to problem solve for not having a smartphone.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I don't remember if this was something you said exactly in the book, or this is just my memory of it, but that the goal isn't to reject technology. The goal is to reclaim childhood for our
Yes,
children.
that's right.
And the internet is just a very, very adult place.
It
And
is.
try as we might, that's proving very difficult to overcome
No,
using
that's
social media.
exactly right. And there are good technologies that we want to teach children to use truly as a tool to enhance their human
Hmm.
capabilities and human
Hmm.
flourishing. The problem with the smartphone in particular, and the category of technology I'm really addressing in the book, is technologies that are meant and designed to addict us, that actually undermine our real flourishing and our ability to
Yeah.
develop those human capabilities and capacities to their fullest potential. And so the saying kind of no to smartphones is really to say yes to so much more in real
Yeah.
life and in the real world. And so, yeah, it's fundamentally a positive vision of like, this is what
Yeah.
childhood is for. And just we're just talking very narrowly about some specific technologies that stunt our children's development and flourishing, rather than help it grow. And so I think that's kind of why I try to explain, there are ways to teach kids how to use technology well in the home,
Hmm.
but a smartphone is inherently difficult, impossible
Hmm.
for a parent to effectively lock down, because, as you mentioned,
Hmm.
like, every app has its own in-app browser, its own portal to
Hmm.
the internet. And
Hmm.
even apps that look mundane or even like educational can have these social media components, the ability for strangers to message your kids, a portal to an internet browser where they can access a social media website, not even through the social media app. And so
Hmm.
I'm particularly taking on this form of technology to say it's too difficult for parents to
Hmm.
effectively oversee or control. And so there's just better and safer ways to introduce them to these tools, but handing them a smartphone is not one of them.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And I want to move on to some
Yes.
practical invitations. But before we do, just to circle back um, to the dangers for just a moment, I think one of the most compelling things early in your book was when you were talking about uh, dopamine addiction. And uh, could you just explain just simply kind of what that's like? I think it was very striking. I think you compared the level of addiction with smartphone dopamine addiction, and maybe explain what all that means. to even some drugs. It's
Yes.
as or more addicting.
Yes, and I think this is actually like the hinge point difference, right? About why these things are so dangerous is that they're designed to have these dopamine effects in our brain, which is dopamine's a neurotransmitter. It releases a little burst of pleasure in the brain. And these apps and phones, their features like notifications or the next
Hmm.
video that auto loads for you gives you this burst of dopamine, this novelty.
Hmm.
Okay, this is a new post, or I got a new like, because we get a lot of dopamine from social feedback. And so these
Hmm.
social media platforms are wired then to feed kids up this kind of instant, constant social feedback, novelty of material. And so even if they're only on an app for 15 minutes, they're getting these constant dopamine hits while they're on that are artificially high, higher than the kind of dopamine we would get from real life experiences. And so then what
Hmm.
happens is the brain actually plunges into this dopamine deficit as soon as you leave the app because dopamine doesn't produce lasting satisfaction or fulfillment. It's actually designed to kind of produce craving to make us do
Hmm.
something again. And so dopamine is actually often linked to biological needs, like the need that we have to eat, because we get a little dopamine when we eat a good meal. But in the online world, it's completely disconnected from a real biological need. And so what happens is you leave the app, your brain plunges into this deficit state, and it creates this constant craving and compulsion to go back on. And so the time limit is never enough. The fact that we even call it like a time, like these time limits are going to make a difference. The child is continuing to crave that online virtual world hours after they leave it. And so these time limits don't map onto a child's mental or emotional time spent kind of living in this virtual world, wondering what they've missed since they've been last on, and this constant craving that dopamine creates. And what it also does over time, just like highly addictive drugs, is their brain becomes habituated then to these high levels of dopamine hits through the screen, and they start to become desensitized to pleasures in the real world. So things that would normally bring you pleasure in real life, like going for a bike ride or reading a book, start to feel boring and mundane and dull to these kids that are overstimulated by the screens. And
Hmm.
this is a brain like biochemistry level effect that's happening. And so I always tell that to parents because I think parents often feel frustrated. They're like, the screen time limits aren't working. And it's because it's not anything to do with you as a parent not being able to like
Hmm.
manage this well. It's the design of the technology is so inherently addictive, especially to a child's developing brain, that, as one mom said, it's like she's standing, but it's just her standing between her child, their developing brain, and this drug dispensing machine.
Hmm.
And there are studies, brain imaging studies, that show the structural changes that happen in the brain to users of social media are the same changes that happen in the brains of heavy drug users. And it's because the dopamine, it's the same effect from
Hmm.
highly addictive drugs. The same effect is from social media and smartphones, changes the brain the kind of same ways. So yeah, that's my kind of pitch to parents, is just to understand it is designed to be addictive.
Hmm.
You're not failing really as the parent. This
Yeah. Yeah.
technology is meant to addict your child. And so that is why you see the kind of compulsive behavior, the constant draw towards the screen whenever they get off, is created by that dopamine.
Yeah. And a great witness of transparency with that is the late Steve Jobs, right? Didn't want his children to have iPhones or iPads. And so many of the
Nope.
Silicon Valley billionaires have tech-free houses because they
Yes.
know. And
They send
uh,
their kids to tech-free schools. They do
yeah,
not let their own kids use this technology. I'm like, that should be
yeah.
revealing in itself, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Something is amiss here.
Hmm.
Great. But so all that to say, we have an invitation culturally right now, I think, to choose something else if we want to do that. So what are some of the choices families are making, and what are some of the intentional ways that they're going about doing that that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I would say, my book, The Tech Exit, what it really talks about is just choosing that kind of countercultural lifestyle of not giving your child or teen a smartphone or social media. And maybe you've already given your children those things and you're thinking, oh no, it's too late. My book is actually like very clear. It's never too late to reverse course. In fact, lots of
Hmm.
families have reversed course out of those decisions. I think just like anything in parenting, we get new information. We didn't know something was harmful to our children. Now we do, and we can make changes. And it's okay. It's actually even good to even apologize to our kids and say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But now that we do, we want to do what's best for you. And this is going to be hard to give this up, but we think it's necessary and it's what's best for your flourishing. And so I also explain one of the biggest things I try to encourage families to do is to just start with a detox. And I know we might
Yeah.
get more into explaining what that is, but I think if you're even skeptical to doing this over the long term, trying to give up these screens for 30 days can really make a difference. And I think can even be a way of testing out this type of lifestyle for yourself and just see what the benefits are firsthand for your children and your family. And so, yes, the main kind of countercultural lifestyle the tech exit holds out is just saying no to smartphones, social media, tablets, and video games during childhood. And I distinguish those screens in particular because those are interactive screens. It's something that gives you, as the user, this kind of constant feedback. Whereas a television is a passive screen, you kind of consume the content, but it's not the same level of dopamine, which comes from these kind of constant notifications or the next, 30-second reel video. And so that kind of interactive experience, those are the types of screens I'm encouraging families to leave behind and to kind of choose to live counterculturally. And then I also just walk through like as a parent how to kind of explain that to your children, those decisions, and educate them on these
Hmm.
harms and dangers that we're talking about, because we want to also prepare them for how to handle digital temptations when they're outside our home or when they're adults, and to understand exactly what we're protecting them from. And so the message of the book is kind of both that we do everything we can as parents to protect them by making these kind of countercultural decisions, and we prepare them for how to handle and face those things that they might be exposed to by a friend, or that they might face as an adult. And so explaining and educating our children themselves, equipping them with that knowledge. And then, as I mentioned, with the other kind of alternative phones, adopting alternatives instead when a child then does develop a real need to have a communication tool, opting for a kind of non-smartphone option. And then also just intentionally setting up digital accountability in your home and
Hmm.
family screen rules around other screens, right? Like computers and TVs. And I think that
Hmm.
principle of accountability and transparency is also kind of countercultural. I think a lot of times we treat all these devices as our private, personal devices. But I think it's really important for the sake of our children that any kind of access they have to internet or a computer is always public and
Hmm.
purposeful, something the family can
Hmm.
see into. And there's no kind of personal ownership of devices, even when they get a first cell phone that's a non-smartphone. It's, not their device. It's the family's device that's on loan to them. And there's this expectation of accountability where a parent could check the child's email account or text messages if they had a concern. So I think that is really where the protection comes in, is having those kind of in-person accountability measures set up, and don't just rely on, an internet filter. So I'm not anti-internet filter, for your
Hmm.
family home computer. That can be a helpful layer of protection, but it can't
Hmm.
replace the kind of family relationships of accountability and transparency. And then the other thing to do to live counterculturally is to just trade these screens for real life responsibilities and pursuits. I think a lot of the families
Hmm.
I interviewed gave their children more responsibility and more kind of independence in real life, letting them take on
Yeah.
chores and even adult like tasks around the home, and then encouraging them to serve their broader communities in those ways. And those things really actually help kids progress towards adulthood, whereas smartphones just stunt that development. And I would say, choosing to try to fill your children's time and their life with those positive real world goods also then makes the kind of appeal of these screens that offer these kind of cheap digital substitutes to real responsibility and freedom and friendship and pleasure, just way less appealing to a kid. And so that's fundamentally the tech exit is really a positive no. We're saying
Yeah.
no to certain screens to say yes to all these real world goods that we want our children to experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think in The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, he talks a lot about um, we are increasingly giving these technologies to our kids while also being increasingly concerned for their safety in the real world.
Yes.
and and just kind of the irony of that smartphones are actually an incredibly dangerous place to send children, and the real world
Yep.
isn't maybe as dangerous as we make it out to be. My oldest is 10, and so taking some of his encouragement of increasing freedom, sending them out into the world is like, okay, that's uncomfortable. My generation has a hard time with that, but there's just an irony there. And I think you make an important distinction in the book, just to follow up on what you just shared, between accountability and surveillance. Um,
Hmm.
so, so,
Exactly.
so, so as parents, how do we distinguish between healthy accountability versus like a police state surveillance of our children?
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. And this is not like snooping. I think parents
Yeah,
I'm not encouraging helicopter parenting. I think
yeah,
that, and what most families said is it was the expectation of accountability that was itself the protection. They're not
hmm,
spending hours reading through all their children's messages or things like that
yeah,
because that's
yeah,
just, I mean, it's too much. But it's
yeah,
just more that if I had a concern, I'm noticing something, or I hear you say something like your friend said this to you, then it's like I have the ability as the parent to access that in order to kind of keep you safe. And I then want us to have a conversation about it. And I actually said, most families said that the expectation of accountability actually led to their children volunteering more information to say,
hmm,
hey, just in case you check my phone, so and so sent me this thing. And like I told them that was not cool and that was not appropriate. And and just being actually then able as the parent to shepherd your kids through these things more because they actually then end up coming to you rather than kind of being tempted to hide it or be embarrassed about it. So I think the accountability really is itself the protection. And it does not mean you're going through these messages all the time. And I think some of these families, the parents just kind of did random spot checks of like, hey, I'm just going to check
sure,
your last 10 text messages tonight, just so the kid knew, okay, they actually can do this. And so therefore, like,
hmm,
I am going to self monitor more and be able to kind of have conversations with my parents about those things. But I think it's just a good expectation for kids to understand like their parents are really coming alongside them. We're not trying to
hmm,
surveil them. We're just trying to help
hmm,
guide them towards adulthood and protect them from harmful influences and help them also manage that and manage how to kind of respond to those situations. Yeah, so I would also say on the helicopter parenting thing, I think especially if we are restricting freedoms more in the digital realm, by not allowing them to have a smartphone or social media, we do need to allow them to have more freedoms in the real world
hmm,
and not
hmm,
be constantly kind of tethering them to our house, but allow them more like responsibility and independence as they get older to bike to their friend's house or yeah, to go drive somewhere and do something. And I think there's also a temptation now, and part of the reason some parents give their kids a smartphone is they want to track their child's location all the time. And I'm not sure
hmm,
that that's really healthy for the parent
hmm,
child relationship. I think we want to be growing in trust and allowing them more freedom and with the expectation of like, yep, they tell us where they're going or they tell us what their plan is, but we're not constantly checking up on them or tracking their location. And we're trusting that if they need our help or they get into a situation, that they will call us and reach out
hmm,
and
hmm.
that we don't need to be the ones constantly surveilling. So, yes, this book is not about, it's like the opposite of helicopter parenting, but I think it's more, the focus is more on accountability. And I think that's good even for parents to have in the home, that there is just this
Yeah,
expectation of as a family, we're helping each other be guarded against digital temptations or secret sins kind of creeping in through these technologies by living in accountability. But that's not helicopter parenting or constant surveillance of our kids.
yeah, no, that's so good. And so many of those things, like you mentioned, apply directly to us too. So
Yep.
many of the men that I have close friendships with have accountability partners,
Yep.
use things like Covenant Eyes
Yep.
to make sure they're doing healthy things with their
Yep.
phones. And just to plug a resource we use in our diocese, it's a little card that's on our diocese's website called How to Be Saints with Smartphones. It's just basically turning your phone into a dumb phone.
Great. That's
um,
great.
but so many of those same things, just like we don't need to have our phones in our bedrooms. If
Exactly.
we have a
Yep.
computer, like as you were describing the boundaries for our kids, it's like I should only use the computer in our living room too. Like, why would I not do that? And why, yeah. Anyways, so
No,
much we could,
exactly. And that's part of it, right? Is the accountability I'm talking about is to try to actually set up our kids to hopefully then in their adult lives
yeah,
be used to this expectation of having accountability structures, knowing that it's for our good and it's for our protection. So yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Amen. Oh, that's beautiful. So, last couple of things. I want to talk about resources that you'd point people to, but before we do, if you could just talk a little bit more about a digital detox.
Yeah.
This will be coming out in the spring of 2026, and I think summer is a great time to pursue something like that, whether it's a full 30 days or something a little bit shorter. How could families go about doing that? What are the gains that can be made with that?
Yes. So I think digital detoxes are incredible. There is a whole science behind them because as we were talking about these addictive effects on the brain, those addictive effects can be reversed. And it's truly by just abstaining. Like
Yeah.
abstinence is really what allows our brains to then reset to these normal levels. And so the dopamine, these kind of artificially high levels of dopamine we get used to, that then puts the brain in this kind of chronic dopamine deficit can be restored by just doing a detox and getting rid of those screens that are providing that stimulation. So I recommend in the detox plan in the book, no smartphones, no tablets, no social media, no video games for 30 days. And I would also say like minimal use of television as well. Again,
Hmm.
TVs don't have the exact same effects as these interactive screens, but I would just say definitely not a daily thing. Maybe you let your family watch a movie on a Friday night. But
Yep. Yep.
and then really like no computers unless it's for this would be more relevant in the school year, but like a school related research purpose. But obviously, if
Hmm.
they're scrolling online or going on YouTube on the computer, it's going to have those same addictive effects as a tablet or smartphone. And so
Yeah.
those are kind of the rules of the road for the detox. And then in terms of how you do it, it really is as simple as saying, we're going to do these 30 days. We're going to set it aside on our calendar. We're going to plan for this time. Like we're going to be
Mhm.
proactive and we're going to talk to our kids about it as a family, explain why we're doing this and the benefits that we hope to see from it, which is, yeah, less cravings and compulsions towards these screens, more relational time together, that these screens aren't separating us as a family, but we're focused on actually building better relationships as a family. We're also going to improve our sleep, our memory,
Hmm.
our ability to
Yeah.
focus, to pay attention, and to enjoy pleasures in the real world. Because as I was saying, those desensitization effects, like going for a bike ride feels boring to a kid who's on a screen all the time. Well, going through a detox, they actually start to enjoy real life again. And you will see your children's creativity and imaginations and ability to play independently come back. Because I often hear from parents, I can't imagine doing a detox because I actually can't imagine dealing with this child without a screen. And to
Hmm.
those parents, I just encourage them, you need to push through this initial pain point. The first
Hmm.
7 to 10 days will be hard. It's just like breaking a bad habit, and they are addicted. And so it will feel a little bit like they're going through withdrawal, but you keep going and you reach those 10 days, and then the kids actually stop asking for the screens as much and their ability to entertain themselves comes back. So it takes planning as a parent. I think you do need to plan for activities and things that you're going to do as a family instead, or activities you're going to have your child do if they are used to being on a screen, so that you're replacing that with something. And it involves, I think, on the front end, a lot more of your time and attention as a parent
Hmm.
is one of those things you're replacing, to guide them into kind of how to play or read or get outside. But then gradually throughout the course of the detox, they'll be able to take on more of that kind of independent play on their own. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I would just encourage parents to try this out for yourself, like road test this lifestyle, because so many families said, it didn't seem possible. But then they did the detox. They committed to doing it because I really believe anyone can commit to something for 30 days. It's just 30 days. Um, and then they got to the end and they saw all these benefits in their kids. They saw these changes in their family and they were like, oh my goodness, why didn't we do this sooner? And kind of like, we don't want to go back to that. And so that is kind of what launched some of these families into doing the tech exit long term, or to having a much healthier restored relationship with technology. So it can really benefit anyone at any age, at any time to detox. And there are studies that have been done on adults that show just like
Hmm.
2 weeks of adults not having internet access on their phone majorly
Hmm.
increased their mental health, their sleep, their well-being, their ability to focus and pay attention. And so there really is a real brain element to this, which is why detoxing is so successful. And if you think of other addictive things, like alcohol or drugs or tobacco, like Alcoholics Anonymous, these programs, it's all about detoxing. It's just we have to get
Hmm.
these things out of our system, and then we're actually able to see the harms it was having on us, and we're able to have a healthier life, being free of the kind of compulsions that these addictive properties or substances kind of induce. And so it's really the same for screens. And the summer is a great time because it's beautiful out. Kids can get outside. There's lots more things to do. Send them on bike rides, send them to the pool, sign them up for summer camps or other activities.
Hmm.
They don't have to be on screens for school, and just get them reading books. A lot of libraries do summer reading challenges. So it's a
Hmm.
great time of year. And I even encourage families, like, you could actually start the detox by going on like a screen-free family vacation for a week. Maybe you go
Hmm.
camping for a week
Hmm.
without your devices, and that's kind of what starts you out on the detox. So yes, lots of great kind of alternatives available in the summer. So I would encourage families to really try it out for yourself and experience the benefits in your family. So don't be afraid, and just you have to commit to those 30 days. Don't give up a weekend when it's really hard. Just keep going. I promise it will get better.
Yeah, that's so good. My family, largely inspired by your book, did a screen free summer last summer, and
Oh,
it took
awesome.
a little while to get into. I but eventually it was so beautiful, and we're in northern Wisconsin where there's lakes around every corner, and it's just such a beautiful space. The thing that I struggled with was I still came to work and was on my laptop all day,
Uh,
and so we went on a trip then in September, and I did a 10-day phone fast where I just turned my phone off for 10 days. And
wow, that's amazing.
it was so amazing. Like, I just was writing down, what did I do? I like went for walks. I wrote letters to some friends I'd lost touch with. I took my time cooking meals. I slept more and better. And it was just like, I hated turning my phone back on and opening my computer again, but I came back to it having seen what life could be like. And so hopefully it approached those things in a more balanced way. Uh,
That's
so
great.
highly recommend. I think for adults, it's tougher to figure it out because our lives are so enmeshed with these
Or
technologies.
so
But
I know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so last thing, resources you'd point people to. We'll obviously have a
Yep.
link to your excellent book, but other books that are out there, anything online you'd point people to,
Yeah, no,
podcasts.
so definitely my book. And I also always tell people, since I think people don't always realize, I have accompanying book website, thetechexit.com, where I have some resources that are kind of meant to go with the book and supplement the book. So I have like a discussion guide that walks you through different discussion questions for the various chapters. Because I do encourage parents, if possible, to read it with other parents in your community, because part of
Yes.
what I'm really advocating for is finding other families. Like, don't do this alone. It's a lot harder to be the only one, and it is harder for
Hmm.
your kids if they
Hmm.
genuinely have no friends who also aren't on smartphones. So finding one or two families to do this with you is so critical to success, especially in the long term. But also, even doing a detox. A lot of families said they got like one other family to kind of detox with them so that their kids kind of had other friends going through that experience. So
Hmm.
read the book with other families and parents and talk about this together. So the discussion guide is there. I also have a screen-free activity guide for just ideas of things to do during a detox. And then I have a tech exit checklist, which is just a quick, like, 2-page PDF of summarizing the main tips and principles from the book. So that's all on the techexit.com. I also recommend for adults the book How to Break Up with Your Phone. I think it's very
Hmm.
helpful. Just thinking about practices, maybe you can't completely give up your smartphone. What are ways you can make it less addicting and less distracting to you as a parent? And then for children, if you're looking for resources to read with your kids, for younger kids, I recommend Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and they even have a Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, just about training them for how they should respond if they see inappropriate or dangerous things online. And then also there's a resource called Kids, Brains, and Screens by Melanie Hempy, who runs the organization Screen Strong. And Screen Strong offers a whole like 30-day detox plan if you're like looking for a plan to kind of go through. But
Mm,
they also have this resource that's really meant for kind of older kids and teens that educates you about how your brain works and then why these
mm.
screens are having these kind of addictive effects. But it's in kind of language that's understandable for kids. And so with your really working to educate your children on like why we're doing this detox or why we're living out this tech exit lifestyle. I think that resource, Kids, Brains, and Screens, is a great kind of resource book to go through as a family with your children. And there's so many other resources I can mention. I know we talked about the book, The Anxious Generation. If you really
Hmm.
want to do a very deep dive into the research, it's not like the lightest of reading. It's kind of a dense book. But if you want to know all the studies and research, you can go through that, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. So I think those would be like my top recommendations in terms of just resources for families that would support you. And the last resource I should mention is another book called How to Reset Your Child's Brain by Dr. Victoria Dunkley. She was kind of my first foray into digital detoxes and how they work and how they can be beneficial. And she's a medical doctor who has done this with a lot of the patients in her practices who struggled with symptoms of kind of ADHD or autism, just a lot of dysregulation emotionally. And she just found these detoxes to be tremendously effective. Some of these children didn't actually have ADHD. They had these kind of screen induced symptoms that mimicked
Hmm.
those conditions. And then for children who did, just detoxing without other interventions, like cut their symptoms in half. And so, even if that's you as a parent, or you're just struggling to understand why your kids are having more emotional outbursts or trouble paying attention or focusing, like I guess don't underestimate the influence that screens could be having on some of those things. And so I think her book, How to Reset Your Child's Brain, can be a helpful resource too for walking families, more detailed through how to do a detox and kind of the benefits of that.
Oh, that's terrific. We will grab links for all those and put them in the video description for everybody. Uh, Claire, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a huge gift to our diocese to have this information.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me.